When I was younger and I played tournament chess, I was playing tournament chess when I was like 13 years old. I was more into the attacking players, especially when I got older and played Blitz. The Acklines, the Tau in particular. The Kasparovs, even not so much Kasparov today because Kasparov, he's off the fucking rails politically. But as I got older, certain people like Petrosian became one of my favorite people. Now, Tal is still my favorite player, but the style of play is the thing that when I was younger, I couldn't necessarily get all that involved in. At least it didn't do it for me. The books were dry. Like reading a book on Karpov's chess is one of the driest things on the planet. And then you get older and you revisit the book and it's like, wow, this book is fascinating. The guy who was the best at that was probably Petrosian. And Petrosian would get people in these positions where they would just scream. It was like, it wasn't so much that the guy could lose the game, but he had no good moves to make. Every move that he made lost. And not just every move that he made lost. Not even lost immediately. Just lost a little bit more. A little bit more of his freedom. A little bit more places where he can go on the board. It's like being strangled. Like, the guy just... That's how his games went. He was a master at that. Choking the devil out of a person and making that person outright scream to the point of, okay. Yes, I have a bunch of pieces on the board, but I can't move anywhere. And as a chess player, when you're playing in that position like that, it is punishing. It is brutal. Because even though people just look and it's like, okay, those guys aren't doing anything. All of the stuff that is going on in your head and the constriction, you feel like there's an aspect of you that is in that game. And as you get more constricted in the game, you feel like you're in a vice grip yourself. What is taking place right now, at this moment in British politics is that it is Boris Johnson with an amazing bit of political strategy that ultimately in the end failed and leaving him in a position that was weaker than when he went into it. I'm going to show you something that just took place that has just made Boris Johnson's day that much worse and has made his position that much more tenable. And this guy called it. Not bragging, but I kind of made this point several days ago about what was taking place and even months ago that there would be a general election. They haven't called a general election yet, but there will be a general election. And on that day, Boris Johnson will dance in the streets of joy. But right now, there is no joy in this administration. There is only pain and constriction. And Jeremy Corbyn putting a vice grip on Boris Johnson. And Boris Johnson having no good answers for the particular political predicament that he finds himself in. Welcome to the Soapbox After Dark. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Might as well say Soapbox After Dark, Saturday edition of Soapbox After Dark. No, I'm not typically here on Saturdays, but to be honest, I pop in whenever I want. This channel is named Jamarl Thomas. I want to talk about British politics, and I've been bugging the hell out of everybody that I've come across talking about this, so I figured, hey, might as well do a video. Before I do that, if you enjoy this content, you find yourself coming back often, please like, share, subscribe. This channel is growing. We're almost at 25,000. I am stunned by that number, but we're almost at 25,000. So yeah, keep going. Also, if you really dig it, please consider supporting through PayPal or Patreon. Take a look at this. This spells the worst day of Boris Johnson's life, even though it looks so mundane and so dated. Looks like it happens in the 1920s. But no, this is happening today or yesterday. British politics. Boris Johnson. This is the House of Lords. We don't have anything like the House of Lords in the United States. This is an unelected body of human beings that gets to have a say in the laws that are being passed. So think of it as you have government and think of it as you have a bunch of plutocrats. For all intents and purposes. Supposedly, the idea is they're supposed to be specialists in their field and craft and all of these other aspects of British society that can come together and talk about and co-sign the laws that are passed by the House of Parliament. Now, keep in mind, Britain has a very long tradition. That tradition comes back to the time of kings and queens. And so the small permutations that they made in regards to getting this kind of thing where government, the people, Parliament, is in power, had to go through certain fits and starts. Nevertheless, House of Lords, at this point, has to co-sign this particular bill. Are you going to allow a no-deal Brexit? And do you co-sign the bill that was passed by Parliament that says we will not leave on October the 31st and that the Prime Minister will go, bended knee, hat in hand, Boris Johnson, gorilla chest and all, and get an extension? Worst day of Boris Johnson's life.
Just to remind the House, the question is that this bill do now pass. As many of that opinion will say content. The contrary not content. The contents have it.
And just like that, all of Boris Johnson's best laid plans just failed. All of them. And brilliant, yes. Boris Johnson went into this process with what? An extra person that allows a very thin majority. He had no way to affect his political will, meaning him saying that they were going to leave on October the 31st was impossible under normal parliamentary conditions. Meaning under the condition that you can get your parliament to toe your line when that line is a no-deal Brexit or the potential for a no-deal Brexit, and there is no capacity in parliament at all for a no-deal Brexit, not even in the country itself for a no-deal Brexit. Well, how do you affect that agenda when Theresa May couldn't affect that agenda? Boris Johnson says, I will deselect members. And he did. In a whim, deselected. Why? Because they didn't matter. They didn't matter. All of the failures up until this point didn't matter. Boris Johnson assumed the Parliament will try to prevent a no-deal Brexit. He assumed that he would probably have to deselect various members, but those members didn't matter much at all because what Boris Johnson wanted was an election. What he needed was an election. And the catch is, he can't effect that by himself. You need 2/3 of Parliament, meaning he needs Labour support for an election. So what does he do? Bad acting. Oh, the public has no will for a general election. No will. However, if this bill passes, then I will be forced to have a general election. And deselecting those members that were Tories, by the way, helps his cause. Because his argument is, this is an untenable situation. I can't affect any will as government. I have no majority. And not just no majority, nobody even toes my line. This is untenable. So the thought is, when he called for a general election, that Labour would be almost forced politically to go along with the notion of a general election. Jeremy Corbyn at the end said no and backed away. And for all of the brash bravado in that moment of, how scared he is, he's been calling for an election for 3 years. In that moment, it was the weakest moment of a prime minister's life. Because in that moment, all of his plans needed that vote to go through. Meaning that vote that says we will have a general election, he needed that to go through. Because otherwise, you're stuck with your parliament telling you to go to Brussels and get an extension, something that he said under no circumstances while there was breath in his body that he would do. Parliament is saying, go do it. And the House of Lords in this moment just co-signed it. By law, Boris Johnson will be compelled as prime minister, like an errand boy, to go on bended knee, hat in hand, please Brussels, please give us an extension. Boris Johnson said, fuck you. I'm not going and doing anything. There is nothing that can compel me to do this. Somebody needs to tell Boris Johnson what it means by law. By law. Now, my argument was that from the standpoint of Jeremy Corbyn. Well, that's weird. Oh, I see. From the standpoint of Jeremy Corbyn, he did win an election. Yes. He's won and won for 3 years. Yes. Every leader of the opposition wants an election. Yes. And for all intents and purposes, the derision and everything that's heaped on that person for not taking that election comes across as cowardly and everything else. But that's optics. The reality of it is, Boris Johnson has staked every ounce of political capital that he is never going to go to Brussels to get an extension. And by law, Jeremy Corbyn has put through a bill that said, you will do just that. Why would Jeremy Corbyn get him out of that fix? Why would anybody get him out of that fix? So the response of Corbyn is, I want no parts of this process. I do want an election, but not now. I want to make sure no deal Brexit is off the table. Then we can have this talk about an election. But in real world terms, it's, you've made a mess of this. And for all your plans, you thought you were going to get a general election. I will be forced to give you that election. No, it's off the table. So now, figure this out. And what does he have to figure out? He has to figure out and explain to his Brexiteers that he said he would never do, and to a Brexit party that is eating the Tories' lunch that he said he would never do. And yet the law is saying, go and do just that. Figure it out. Fix it. There are no good options for Boris Johnson in this. This is a vice grip. This is Petrosian squeezing the devil out of an opponent. That's Boris Johnson right now. Jeremy Corbyn squeezing the shit out of him. Here's the catch. And this is what Jeremy Corbyn knows. Jeremy Corbyn knows that there will be an election anyway. Because ultimately the position of Parliament is massively untenable. There's no direction for it. There's no way to deliver Brexit for this particular Parliament because, again, it's entirely untenable. Public is the only person or the only group that can make a deciding factor on this, saying we want to go this way or that way. However, there's no reason to give Boris Johnson this now. And it's very possible that just to get out of this political fix, Boris Johnson is right when Boris Johnson says, I will never do this. And he is willing to break the law to do just that. Which means that there will be a no confidence vote. A, the parliament, the government will be held in contempt. B, there will be a no confidence vote on the prime minister. And with that no confidence vote, there will be an election. Meaning, you don't have to give the prime minister an election at the very moment where he exactly needs an election. If that makes sense. You're going to get the election anyway. If you're looking at this in political terms of what is going to happen if I do X. Well, if I don't give the prime minister this election that he wants, he stews in his juices and has to explain to people, what are you going to do? Are you going to break the law? Are you going to break the law? Are you going to break the law? You said you would never do this. What are you going to do? Are you going to break the law? And you have people pissed off. People in parliament now screaming, the prime minister will do and obey. And the prime minister is saying, I will never do this. What is Boris Johnson going to do? This is a vice grip. This is a vice grip. It is very possible that Boris Johnson gets somebody to call a no confidence vote on Boris Johnson. Meaning Boris Johnson ends up calling a no confidence vote on himself in order to trigger a general election. That's how bad he needs a general election to get out of this fix. And insofar or as long as Labour is not giving it to him, then he's stuck into this quagmire of, not only can I not affect my political will in Parliament, not only do I have no force, meaning I have no weapon in this case, because the EU knows I have no negotiation at all because I can't deliver Parliament in any capacity. But I said I would never go and do something that Parliament has just told me to do. I need an election to get out of this. And no confidence vote would give you that election. But that would be embarrassing. Which again is kind of explains why Jeremy Corbyn decided, yeah, no dice. You want an election that bad? Stew and figure it out. I mean, that's a brutal strategy, man. I tell you, man, there's an elegance in the way that politics is done sometimes in the UK. And this very specific moment of what is taking place right now where Boris Johnson has zero answers to get out of this particular quagmire is fucking beautiful. Think about it. Nobody's getting shot or killed or murdered. This is politics within the terms of the country itself, where it is not even on Brexit specifically. It is about who's going to lead Brexit. And in going into an election, the only way for Corbyn to get into power, he decides to give up this very specific moment of a potential of getting in power in order to delay it with the assumption that politically he's going to get it anyway and under better terms with a prime minister that he's either is going to be found in contempt or found in no confidence. It's fucking beautiful politics. God, it's beautiful politics. I've argued that Boris Johnson is probably the best person to deliver Brexit. The reason I argue that is not because I love Boris Johnson per se. It's more so because of all the candidates. Boris Johnson is the one that they know would leave without a deal. In which case, they will be more likely to have some level of negotiation with Boris Johnson if the EU is willing to negotiate at all, because the last thing they want is an uncontrolled exit by the UK. At least that's my analysis of it. I don't necessarily think Europe wants to take this chance of what does it mean for us if these guys tumble out in this kind of Boris Johnson, no deal, drunk man off of a cliff Brexit. I would wager that between having some level of a deal and giving some level of leeway to the new prime minister, that would be, if they wanted to avoid it. By the same token, it is also possible that Europe wants to punish Britain for leaving, to make it clear to anybody else of these Eurosceptic governments that you will not get any help from us and you're leaving. And the fact that they are sticking Britain with Theresa May's deal that was voted down 3 times and they're saying this is the only deal we're willing to negotiate with kind of gets across that their goal is to some degree, make them suffer. The question becomes, which one do they care about more? This uncontrolled exit from the European Union or punishing Britain? I strongly suspect economic interests trumps that type of stuff, even though all of this, for the most part, is a certain degree of torture for the last 3 years, and Britain has lost, 2 prime ministers. If any government is looking to leave, I don't necessarily think what is taking place in Britain right now is the poster child for, yes, this is awesome, let's do this. How much blood is enough? I would say this. My bet would be that they would not want a no-deal Brexit. Ergo, Boris using this as an attack piece for it is somewhat of a potent attack, especially since I don't understand any negotiation where you just leave or you can't leave. I think that's weird. So yeah, my argument in this is correct. However, Boris jumped the shark, and I understood he needed an election and everything else, but this backfired massively, and this is the worst case scenario in regards to your name if your name was Boris Johnson. Either way, they're not leaving on the 31st. By law. I don't care what Boris Johnson says. They are not leaving on the 31st. And there will most likely be an election, which is why Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn are out politicking right now in almost election-style fashion. It'll come. It will come after Boris Johnson shames himself one way or the other. It will come. I'll leave it here. And by the way, I don't like Johnson. He's a charismatic figure, however, and I do accept and acknowledge that particular part. I think he is dangerous in an election. He is not Donald Trump in the sense of being nothing in his head. He might come across as a clown, but the political strategy that he came up with, even though it failed, he was already working from a weakened position, was brilliant. He was a bad actor, yes, and all this other stuff is true, but that's not something that Trump would have ever came up with. And what is taking place right now from the standpoint of the elections where he's talking about, okay, we're going to give it this way. We're going to give this way. They're spending money like drunken sailors. Why? Because they know that the austerity hurt and tarnished the image of the Tory party. And he knows that Corbyn's main pitch is, we're going to have a country for people. A better world is possible. Okay, that better world is kind of possible with the Tories. Look at me, I'm spending money. I'm spending money. The Republicans would have never done that in the United States. This is kind of my point. Like, he is a dangerous politician. So, it's nice to see that Corbyn, at the very least, has a certain competence about him when dealing with Johnson. But on the campaign trail, that's where it gets kind of interesting in regards to the policies that these guys are pushing. And not just that, Brexit, because Brexit is probably going to be the main thing in this election. The public is going to have to choose what it wants. And whoever it chooses for that part is going to get somewhat of a mandate in how it wants to proceed with Brexit. I would push to Corbyn to not abandon this notion of the referendum. The country decided, it voted. They want to go out. Take them out. And don't back out of the referendum. Stop listening to the Blairites. They hate your guts. All right. I'm ending it here, 19 minutes. That's not too bad for somewhat of a rundown of what is taking place in the politics of it. Politics in Britain is fascinating. Honestly, it is really fascinating. And there's nothing like it, at least in the context of the United States. We don't have a queen. So you don't have the prime minister beseeching the queen to bookend parliament, to essentially suspend parliament for a period of time. There's nothing like that. There's nothing like that. I mean, in that process, the queen usually is just going to go along with the government because that war has already been fought. However, The fact that it happens means that the Queen has agency, even if the Queen never uses that agency. Now, the interesting question is, does she have agency if she never uses it? Well, if the Queen says, no, I'm not doing that, and give her reasons, what happens? What happens? You allow, in this particular catch, a constitutional crisis based on this notion of royalty. This person was appointed by God. There's nothing like that in our politics. And in a weird way, there's nothing like that in our politics because Britain was the country that we broke away from. Isn't that fascinating? Our country and the history of our country, even though it's a tick to the right of British politics, always been that way. But the processes and procedures in our country, to some degree, is because we broke away from the UK. God, that stuff is fascinating. That stuff is fucking fascinating. All right, I'll leave this here. Like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal. Patron. British politics is fucking fantastic. And I know some people are like, what? Is he really wowing over? Yes, I wow all over this stuff.